The night it all started, I came home to find the front door half open, just swinging there, silent in the evening light. It was one of those moments that freeze you in place. Your brain tries to process the obvious things. Was there a break-in? Is someone inside? But the scene didn't quite match anything sinister. The house was still, perfectly normal, too quiet, maybe, but untouched. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. Her coat was on the rack, her shoes lined up by the door. The light in the living room was on, casting a dim glow across the hall. "Lena?" I called out, not too loud, in case she was just asleep. No answer. Just the stillness of a lived-in home that felt odd, like it had been borrowed by someone who didn't belong. My stomach tightened as I went farther in. Then, halfway down the hall, I noticed something, a smell, faint but there. Expensive, dark, heavy cologne, the kind that almost chokes the air with its sharpness. I wasn't sure what had me standing there, sniffing like some bloodhound, but it was unmistakable. I knew my own scent, knew Lena's, knew the subtle mix of our home. This was foreign. Male. And way too strong, like someone had practically bathed in it. The kind of scent that announces itself. I felt a flush of anger, or maybe just dread, but I was too far in to turn around. I walked upstairs, half expecting to find her asleep or getting ready for bed. But the silence continued. The door to our bedroom was cracked open just a sliver. Through it, I could see Lena's side of the bed, her pillows slightly rumpled. And there, on the nightstand, lay a single tie, red silk, folded like it belonged there. It was a tie I didn't recognize. And, let's be clear, I hadn't worn a tie in at least a month. I stood there, just staring at that tie. It didn't belong to me, didn't belong in our room, didn't belong anywhere in our life. And yet, there it was, lying on her nightstand like it had every right to be there. Every logical explanation darted through my head, but they all crumbled under the weight of that cold, simple fact: this wasn't mine, and no one else should have left it there. I picked it up, felt the smoothness of the fabric between my fingers. It felt expensive, more than anything I'd buy for myself, but not too flashy. Whoever wore it had wanted to look sharp without standing out. It had that hint of class, an understated confidence that didn't need permission. I set it back down, wondering why she'd leave it here, in plain sight. Did she forget? Or was she testing something, testing me? The thought made me feel a cold tightness in my chest. I didn't want to imagine it, didn't want to accept what seemed increasingly obvious, but here I was, alone in my bedroom, staring down at proof I didn't ask for. After a few minutes, I started looking around, not for anything in particular, just on edge, my eyes scanning corners and surfaces I'd usually ignore. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Lena's favorite perfume was missing from the dresser. The spot where it always sat, that tiny square of cleared space, was empty. I hadn't seen her use it in weeks. I knew that because I'd bought it for her last Christmas, a scent she only wore when she wanted to impress. She used to spray it on when we'd go out together, a little spritz before a date night. But lately? Lately, it seemed like date nights had disappeared, along with any sign of that perfume. I turned, trying to keep my breathing steady, trying not to give in to the growing sense that my life had just split in two. Then, like some final insult, I noticed her makeup bag on the edge of the bed, half-zipped. Inside, the usual mess: lipstick, foundation, all her essentials, but on top, a new shade of lipstick I'd never seen before. Dark, bold. Nothing like her usual taste. I twisted the tube open, stared at the color for a moment. She'd never worn something that intense for me, and in that moment, I knew she never would. When I finally left the room, I felt like I was leaving part of myself there, like I'd walked out a different man than the one who'd stepped in. My head was spinning, mind piecing together moments that had once seemed normal, now exposed as parts of some bigger lie. And that's when I heard her voice from downstairs, muffled but clear enough. She was on the phone. The front door hadn't even latched shut when I'd come home, and she hadn't heard me. Now, her laughter drifted up from the kitchen, soft and warm in a way that felt wrong, felt like it wasn't meant for me. I walked to the top of the stairs and leaned over just enough to catch a few words. No, he has no idea. Yes, I'll see you Thursday. I can't wait either. Her voice had that airy quality, that kind of tone you only hear when someone's completely in the moment. I didn't need to hear another word. I didn't even want to. I walked downstairs slowly, keeping my footsteps even, calm. Her back was turned, and she didn't notice me until I was halfway across the kitchen. When she looked up, her eyes widened, and for just a split second, I saw panic flash across her face. She hid it quickly, but I'd seen it. That was all I needed. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, not hiding the edge in my voice. She blinked, recovering faster than I expected. "Just a friend. You're home early." "Who's the friend, Lena?" She hesitated, then forced a smile, like she was trying to make it all seem ridiculous. "It's no one you know. Just a friend from work." I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking to the counter, where her phone lay face down. I didn't move, didn't reach for it. Just waited, watching her, and I could see her starting to unravel. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, her tone sharper now, defensive. "Who does this belong to?" I pulled the tie from my back pocket, holding it up in front of her. She froze, staring at it, her face going pale. That's yours, isn't it?" I laughed, a short, harsh sound. "You know it isn't." She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She just looked at me, caught between lying and admitting what we both knew. Finally, she took a breath, and her face hardened, like she'd made some kind of decision. "It's not what you think," she started, voice soft but steady. "Not what I think?" I repeated. "So, what is it, then? You forgot to tell me about your new fashion accessory collection?" Her jaw clenched, but she kept her gaze on me. "I didn't want to hurt you, all right? It's just, things haven't been good between us for a while. You've been so distant, so focused on work, like I'm just another part of the routine. I needed someone to talk to, someone who noticed me." "Someone who noticed you," I echoed, feeling a surge of anger I could barely contain. "So you decided the solution was to sneak around behind my back? Let me guess, he understands you in ways I don't?" Her face crumpled, but there was no apology in her eyes. Just defiance. "I tried to talk to you, so many times, but you never listened. You made it clear where your priorities were." My hands shook. I gripped the edge of the counter to keep myself steady. "Don't make this my fault. I might not be perfect, but I didn't turn our marriage into a game." She looked down, pressing her lips together. Then, as if some inner wall had broken, she muttered, "It wasn't supposed to be serious. Just a distraction." "A distraction," I repeated slowly. "So, what now? Do you keep him around for when you get bored? Or is this just the start of a new routine?" She flinched, and I could see the regret creeping into her expression, but still, she didn't apologize. She just looked away, crossing her arms like she was shielding herself from the reality of what she'd done. I stared at her, waiting for anything, a real answer, an apology, a sign that she felt even a fraction of the betrayal she'd thrown at me. But all I got was silence, a silence that seemed to stretch between us like a wall. The silence after that conversation gnawed at me for days. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was that lie, sitting there like it was part of our marriage all along. She didn't seem to feel anything close to the shame or guilt I'd expected, either. She went about her days like nothing had happened, while I felt like I was burning alive inside my own skin. One night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I waited until she'd gone to bed, then I started gathering every piece of her life that she held dear. The fancy designer bags she'd bought on her self-care weekends, the little trinkets from her friends, the expensive skincare products she used like they were her secret weapon. I found the scarf he'd given her, the one I recognized from our bedroom that night. I threw them all into a large cardboard box, one item at a time, feeling a grim satisfaction build with each piece. Then, I went down to the garage, shoved the box into the corner, and poured half a bottle of bleach over everything. When I'd finished, I stepped back, watching as the colors on her precious things faded, their worth draining away. I wanted to feel something, some sense of closure or satisfaction, but I only felt a sharp emptiness, a kind of void that nothing seemed to fill. But that wasn't enough. There was still the man, the other half of this mess. I didn't know him personally, but I knew of him, a colleague from her work that she'd casually mentioned once or twice, always with an air of indifference. I tracked down his social media, found out more than enough to know who he was. He wasn't married, but he had a string of exes, each one documented with photos that were both cringeworthy and predictable. So I did what felt right. I took screenshots of every message Lena had saved, every scrap of evidence I'd pieced together, and I sent it directly to him, attaching a brief message: "She's free now. Enjoy your time together while it lasts." I imagined his face when he read it, the smug self-assurance cracking as he realized his little side affair wasn't as harmless as he'd thought. When I finally returned to bed that night, I felt a strange calm settle over me. She hadn't stirred, hadn't noticed any of it, oblivious even as the life she'd built on lies started crumbling around her. I lay down beside her, knowing that she'd feel every consequence of this choice in the days to come. The next morning, I could see the unease in her as soon as she came downstairs. She looked around the kitchen, maybe noticing little things that felt off, like the way her favorite mug was gone, or how her tote bag wasn't hanging by the door. I watched her closely, waiting for her to ask, but she didn't. Instead, she poured herself a coffee, her hand shaking just slightly. I decided to get straight to the point. "We need to talk," I said, setting my own mug down on the counter. She glanced at me, hesitant but silent, and then sat down across from me. I could see her bracing herself, as if she knew this was it. "I want you to tell me why," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Not excuses. Not blaming me. Just the truth." She took a long breath, staring down at her hands before she finally answered. "I don't know if there's one answer," she said quietly. I felt stuck. Like something was missing. And I didn't know how to fix it. Something was missing? So you decided to find it with someone else? She flinched but nodded. I know it sounds terrible, but yes. I didn't set out to hurt you. I felt invisible sometimes, and he made me feel noticed. I shook my head, struggling to hold back the frustration, the anger that still lingered. And what about now? Do you feel noticed enough? Is this what you wanted? She looked away, her face crumpling slightly. No, of course not. I didn't want any of this. I don't know. I wanted things to feel right again, to feel like we used to. But it got out of control. I stayed quiet, letting her words settle. She was still trying to explain it away as some misguided attempt at finding happiness, some ridiculous search for fulfillment that she thought justified betraying me. And as much as I wanted to shout, to argue, I felt too tired to keep pushing. Finally, I sighed. I need you to understand something, I said, my voice steady. There's no fixing this. I can't unsee what I saw, can't unhear everything you said. You took whatever trust one had in you, and you shattered it. Her face crumpled as she looked down, her shoulders slumping. So, what now? Do you want me to leave? I took a breath, considering my next words carefully. We'll figure out the details later. But yeah. I think it's best if you do. That evening, she packed a few things quietly, just the essentials, stuffing them into a small bag. We didn't say much. The anger had passed, replaced by a hollow kind of acceptance. I sat on the couch, watching her as she moved around the house with a sort of carefulness, as if she didn't want to disturb anything. Every now and then, she'd look over at me, as if hoping for some last-minute reprieve. But I just watched, staying silent, feeling detached, like a stranger to my own life. When she finally finished packing, she stood by the front door, her hand resting on the handle. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then thought better of it. I could see her struggling, but I had nothing left to give her, nothing to make this easier. I walked over to the door and opened it for her. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with something between regret and a silent plea. But all I felt was tired, like I'd been holding up something heavy for too long and had finally set it down. Take care, I said, my voice flat. It wasn't meant to be kind or forgiving, just a simple acknowledgement that this part of our life was over. She nodded, barely meeting my eyes. And then, without another word, she stepped out, closing the door behind her. As the silence settled around me, I felt a strange mix of relief and loss. Relief because it was over, because I wouldn't have to carry around the weight of her lies anymore. But there was loss too, the kind that comes from realizing a part of your life, the plans, the memories, the future you'd imagined, was gone. In the days that followed, I started sorting through everything we'd shared. I boxed up her things, cleaned out the spaces she'd once claimed as her own, turned the house back into something that was just mine. It felt strange, reclaiming a life I hadn't realized I'd let slip away. But slowly, bit by bit, it felt right. Maybe I hadn't come out of this as the same man. I'd lost some things, but I'd gained a new kind of clarity. I'd learned that trust isn't something you can just give away freely, it has to be earned, respected, cared for. And next time, if there ever was a next time, I'd be sure to build something stronger, something honest. As for her, I had no idea where she'd go or what her life would look like from here. But that was no longer my concern.